I want you to imagine the halls of the White House Situation Room in a midnight briefing. American generals lean in over satellite feeds, and when the topic shifts to South Asia, every eye turns to the same point on the map, India. They don't do it because India is the biggest democracy. That's only part of the story. They do it because in an era of uncertainty, India has become the indispensable partner no superpower can afford to lose. From Washington to Moscow, Brussels to Beijing, national capitals have carved out India chairs in their foreign policy planning. They call it a rising power. I call it a global anchor. Why? Because India uniquely combines strategic geography, economic dynamism, democratic legitimacy, and diplomatic agility, an alloy no other nation quite matches. Let's start with the stakes. In 2023, when the US needed access for its Central Asia supply routes out of Afghanistan, it turned to New Delhi's Chabahar port. When Russia faced crippling energy sanctions, it leaned on India's market for its oil and gas. When Southeast Asian capitals worried about Chinese naval patrols, they welcomed joint Indo-Pacific exercises led by New Delhi. Each of these moves tells a single story. Superpowers don't just want India, they need it. And so do medium and small powers from the Maldives to Mozambique. Because India's rise isn't a zero-sum game. Its vaccine diplomacy saved millions. Its lines of credit built schools and roads across Africa. Its cultural emissaries from Bollywood to yoga gurus have won hearts everywhere. That kind of influence can't be bought. It must be earned. And India has earned it. Yet this wasn't inevitable. A century ago, the idea of New Delhi as a global linchpin would have sounded fanciful. But today, India sits at the nexus of trade routes, energy corridors, digital data flows, and multilateral coalitions. Its 1.4 billion people make it the world's largest market, and its democracy gives it moral authority that authoritarian partners simply can't claim. In the next segment, we'll unpack the 4 strategic assets that make India the world's most coveted ally and why every handshake with New Delhi carries more weight than any other bilateral relationship on the planet. Let's begin with geography. Picture the Indian Ocean, a vast expanse that carries more than half of the world's container traffic and most of its energy shipments. At its center lies India's long coastline dotted with deep water ports that reach into East Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. No other democracy can secure these sea lanes so reliably. No other power enjoys the goodwill of coastal states from Djibouti to Singapore. This Indian Ocean lifeline makes New Delhi the natural guardian of maritime commerce and the partner every superpower wants watching its back. Next, democracy and demographics. India is today the world's most populous nation, boasting over 1.4 billion people, 65% of them under age 35. That youthful majority isn't just a statistic, it's an army of engineers, entrepreneurs, and consumers. When global firms consider expansion, they don't merely see a market, they see a workforce and talent pool unrivaled anywhere outside China. Yet unlike many rising powers, India's democratic system gives its partnerships a legitimacy that autocracies lack. Every agreement signed in New Delhi carries the weight of public debate, judicial review, and legislative oversight, qualities that reassure allies seeking stable, predictable cooperation. Third, economic dynamism. In 2024, India became the world's 5th largest economy with a GDP of over $3.7 trillion and growth rates twice that of most developed nations. More than $100 billion in foreign direct investment poured in last year alone, and global tech leaders from Apple to Google have doubled their Indian footprints. These inflows aren't directed at one sector only, they spread across manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, green energy, and digital services. What this means is simple. India isn't just growing fast, it's diversifying smart. And for superpowers seeking resilient supply chains and new markets, India offers a combination of scale and versatility no one else can match. Finally, technology and talent. Indian technologists power nearly every major software firm on the planet. India trains more STEM graduates each year than any other country. Its homegrown startups spanning AI, biotech, fintech, and space are reshaping global industries. When the world talks about Made in India, it no longer refers only to textiles or generic manufacturing. It refers to cutting-edge research hubs in Bengaluru, Hyderabad, and Pune, to quantum computing labs in Mumbai, to satellites designed in Chennai. This technological cachet means alliances with India offer access not just to markets, but to innovation itself. Together, these four assets, prime maritime geography, robust democracy plus youthful demographics, a rapidly diversifying economy, and world-class technological talent, form an alloy of strengths unmatched elsewhere. In Part 3, we'll examine how India leverages these assets through diplomatic masterstrokes from the Quad to vaccine diplomacy to ensure that every superpower, large or small, finds itself drawn to New Delhi's orbit rather than any other. Using these strengths, India has woven a global network that no superpower can ignore. Take the Quad, birthed in 2007, revived in 2017. It brings together the United States, Japan, Australia, and India under a shared vision for a free, open Indo-Pacific. But India is far more than a passive member. It anchors the group with its geographic heft and democratic credibility, hosting joint naval exercises, coordinating supply chain resilience, and spearheading collaborative projects in emerging technologies. When Quad leaders meet in New Delhi, they know they're not simply strengthening ties with a rising power, they're reinforcing the security of half the world's population. Then there is vaccine diplomacy. At the height of the COVID-19 crisis, India's Serum Institute became the world's pharmacy, producing over 1 billion doses and exporting them to more than 100 countries. From Brazil to Bhutan, India's neighborhood first doctrine morphed into humanity first. Beijing could point to its loans, Moscow to its Sputnik brand, but New Delhi delivered jabs, tangible evidence of goodwill that won hearts faster than any press release could. This wasn't charity alone, it was strategic generosity that cemented New Delhi's image as a reliable partner in global public health. Consider the BRICS Forum, where India sits alongside Brazil, Russia, China, and South Africa. India has used this platform not to rubber stamp Beijing's agenda, but to inject its own vision for equitable development. It championed the new development bank's expansion into African infrastructure projects, negotiated rupee-settled trade for energy and agricultural commodities, and built consensus on reforming international financial institutions. In doing so, India showed that it can straddle East and West without sacrificing its autonomy, precisely the quality superpowers prize in a partner. India's climate leadership offers another case in point. As president of COP26's preparatory committee in 2021, New Delhi proposed the Panchamrit Roadmap, a pledge to reach net zero emissions by 2070, to scale up renewable capacity to 500 GW, and to transition millions of polluting cookstoves to cleaner alternatives. Western capitals initially bristled at the slower timeline compared to more advanced economies, yet India's rationale that development must be inclusive and just resonated deeply with global South nations. By framing climate action as an opportunity rather than a burden, India won widespread support and positioned itself as the bridge between wealthy emitters and developing stakeholders. Then there's the Chabahar model in Iran. When the US withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, India quietly continued developing the port of Chabahar, granting landlocked Afghanistan alternative trade routes and announcing investments in rail and road links. This measured persistence showed New Delhi's ability to navigate sanction regimes, uphold its strategic interests, and deliver on commitments, qualities that earned respect not only in Tehran and Kabul, but in capitals from Washington to Brussels. Finally, India's cultural and educational diplomacy extends its influence in less overt but equally potent ways. Scholarship programs like ICCR, Indian Council for Cultural Relations, bring thousands of students and artists to Indian universities and festivals each year, creating a network of alumni who carry home stories of India's pluralistic society. India's soft power toolkit, cricket diplomacy, yoga, film co-productions ensures that every handshake, film screening, or festival performance seeds goodwill in hearts and minds. Through these diplomatic masterstrokes, India has transcended the role of regional heavyweight to become a genuine global balancer. It doesn't merely choose sides, it offers solutions. It doesn't demand loyalty, it earns trust. And in a world where alliances are forged by both steel and soul, India's combination of hard assets and gracious outreach is why every superpower needs it on their side. Let's examine how three great powers, America, Russia, and China, each court India and what that reveals about New Delhi's unparalleled leverage. The United States, in Washington, India has graduated from regional partner to global ally. The 2+2 ministerial dialogues linking foreign and defense secretaries are now fixtures on both nations' calendars. The U.S. sells India advanced defense platforms, Apache helicopters, MQ-9 Reaper drones, C-130J transporters, not merely as arms deals but as instruments of shared security. When American policymakers assess Indo-Pacific strategy, they centerpiece India's Navy and Coast Guard, building logistics nodes from the Andaman Islands to Australia. Beyond hardware, the U.S. prizes India's human capital. Nearly 1 million Indian professionals bolster Silicon Valley and Wall Street, while student exchanges keep academic pipelines open. In short, Washington needs India's hard power, its soft power, and its moral standing as the world's largest democracy to balance both Beijing's assertiveness and Moscow's unpredictability. Russia. In Moscow, India remains the cornerstone of strategic stability. The landmark S-400 air defense pact signed despite U.S. IATSA sanctions speaks volumes. India negotiates with great powers on its own terms. Russia supplies nearly 70% of India's defense hardware, while Indian purchases underwrite Russia's military-industrial base. Energy cooperation is equally vital. India imported over $30 billion in Russian oil and gas in 2023, cushioning Moscow against Western embargoes. When Russia sought a diplomatic foothold in South Asia, it turned to New Delhi's goodwill. In return, India has wisely preserved its autonomy by refusing to endorse Russia's Ukraine campaign, even as it maintains trade and joint exercises. That tightrope walk balancing principle and pragmatism earns nods of respect in Kremlin corridors. China, the counterpoint. Beijing's approach to India is markedly different, and precisely why superpowers prefer New Delhi. China courts Pakistan and Sri Lanka with infrastructure loans, ports, and pipelines, often saddling them with unsustainable debt. It seeks to encircle India through the string of pearls naval bases, yet none of this has won India's strategic loyalty. Instead, India invests in its own ports and transport corridors, Chabahar over Gwadar, IPI, Iran, Pakistan, India over CPEC. When military clashes flared at the LAC in 2020, China realized that coercion would never replace trust. While China remains an imposing neighbor, it lacks India's democratic legitimacy, its diaspora-driven soft power, and its multilateral alliances. As a result, Beijing courts India cautiously, aware that India's partnership with the West, or even a move toward strategic autonomy, could undercut China's Belt and Road ambitions. What this means for India, by engaging each power on its own terms, selling security to Washington, buying stability from Moscow, and holding firm against Beijing, India demonstrates strategic mastery. It never conscripts itself into another's camp. Instead, it shapes the rules of engagement, setting defense procurement timelines, negotiating energy deals at market-friendly rates, and insisting on mutual respect in diplomatic forums. The result is clear: builds bases and shares intelligence with India to check China. Russia sustains its economy through Indian imports and arms contracts. China recalibrates its South Asia policy in response to India's growing influence. This trilateral tango underscores why no superpower can afford to ignore India. Its choices ripple across capitals, corridors, and climbing stock indices. India doesn't just sit at the table, it sets the agenda. As we look ahead, one question looms. What does India's ascent mean for the coming decades, and how can it harness its influence for a more stable, prosperous world? India stands at a once-in-a-millennium inflection point. By 2030, it is projected to match or surpass the West in technology adoption, demographic advantage, and economic heft. Its cities will pulse with smart grid efficiency. Its villages will hum with digital marketplaces. Yet the real prize lies not in GDP figures or patent counts, but in the moral leadership India can offer a fragmented planet. Imagine a G20 presidency where India convenes climate-vulnerable nations with fossil fuel giants, forging a genuinely equitable net zero roadmap. Picture New Delhi chairing an expanded Quad Plus, embedding middle powers from Africa and Latin America into the Indo-Pacific security architecture. Envision India leading a reformed United Nations Security Council, one where emerging economies hold veto rights alongside the P5, reflecting 21st century realities. These are not fantasies, they are strategic possibilities awaiting India's bold stewardship. To realize this vision, India must continue deepening its investments in three critical frontiers: green technology and energy sovereignty. India's commitments under the International Solar Alliance can evolve into an international green bank financing renewables in the global south. By becoming a hub for affordable green hydrogen, India can undercut dependence on Middle Eastern oil, realign global energy markets, and position itself as the world's renewable superpower. Digital public goods and data diplomacy. Building on UPI and Aadhaar, India can export digital commons, open source platforms for citizen services, digital identity, and microcredit. As data becomes the new currency of power, India's model of privacy-protected, interoperable systems can offer an alternative to surveillance-driven architectures, strengthening democratic resilience worldwide. Education and skill diplomacy. With a quarter of humanity under age 25, India's universities and vocational institutes can become global training grounds. Scholarship programs can expand, focusing on climate science, AI ethics, and conflict resolution. As graduates return home, they carry India's pluralistic ethos into every corner of the globe. But strategic policy alone is not enough. India's greatest asset, its soft power, must flourish. Bollywood must continue telling stories that transcend borders. Cricket diplomacy must extend to new formats and locales. Yoga and Ayurveda must be framed not as cultural exports, but as universal paths to well-being. And at home, India must tend to the soul of its democracy, addressing inequality, strengthening the rule of law, and preserving freedom of expression will not only nurture domestic harmony, but also reinforce India's credibility on the world stage. After all, the most persuasive ambassador of democracy is a democracy that works. A call to action for viewers. If you believe in this India dynamic, democratic, and dedicated to global good, there are ways to engage beyond the screen. Share this video with friends and colleagues who care about the future of international order. Comment below. What aspect of India's rising influence inspires you most? Maritime security, vaccine diplomacy, climate leadership. Subscribe and hit the bell for more in-depth analyses of how emerging powers are reshaping our world. Every like, every share, every conversation you spark helps amplify India's story and remind superpowers that when they court New Delhi, they are courting the future itself. As I conclude, remember this: India's journey from the banks of the Ganges to the corridors of global power has only just begun. The choices made in New Delhi will ripple across continents, industries, and generations. For superpowers, India is not merely an ally, it is a compass pointing toward a more balanced, multipolar world. And for viewers like you, understanding India's strategic genius is not just fascinating geopolitical trivia, It is a guide to the changing map of human progress. Thank you for watching. Until next time, and this has been Geo Post, where we decode the world's shifting power dynamics, one nation at a time.